This is Blender 5, and this is the first lighting demo. We have a golf ball, what's supposed to be a golf ball on the ground plane. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to set up a basic 3-point lighting setup to make this hopefully look like it's outdoor and it's really possible. So first thing we want to do before anything else is, if I go to render right now, so go render images and you see shortcuts F12, it says there's no camera. So you have to have at least a camera in order to render. So I'll do add camera. And at this point it added a camera. And what we need to do is we need to make the camera active. The easiest way to do that is just to hit the 0 on the number pad. And what ends up happening is you change to that view. However, if you hold down the little mouse button or you change, you can go back and you can basically reset and go back to where you were and then get the user viewport set up as you would like. So let me just get this set up real quick. A little bit more. And get this. There we go. Like that. And then what I can do is once I get that close, I can do Control Alt and 0 now that I have the active camera, and I will set it to that position. So now it's snapped. And now at this point, I can move it and relocate it. If you have a default camera in the scene, it's not a problem because that's the default. Okay, so I get that set up. Now at this point, if I look, the camera focal length is 35. I'll change that to 70. And also the other thing I want to do is change the rotation. Now to globally move this around isn't a problem to basically adjust this as needed. But to actually do any changes with rotation, I don't want to do it globally because this isn't necessarily perfectly straight. So I'm going to go to local, and you'll see that basically we have a different setup. And if I grab the red one, I can kind of angle that back up and get something that I like. And if I go this way, it just kind of pans back and forth. If you try to do that not in local mode, you'll actually get the camera to skew. Let me show you. If you do this, you see how the camera gets skewed. So there's no easy way to kind of fix it unless you're in local mode. So let's hit render again, and render image. And at this point, you can see we have background, and we have no lights. Everything's black. I'm going to hit escape to get out of it. And let's go to our world. And by default, the world is gray for the background. So we're going to hit horizon color, and I'm going to change this to a blue. Don't make sure there's no yellow in the sky, or it's going to look really strange. So probably a blue violet. And then it's very subtle, the amount. The default's RGB. If you want a little bit more control, I prefer using the U saturation and value. The U basically changes the color. The saturation adjusts the intensity, and then the value is the brightness, and I find that easier to personally adjust on the computer. So now that we've set that up, go render image, and now we're in blue sky. Okay, so now we need to add some lights. I'm going to add lamp, point, and I'm just going to use point lights for this. And let me relocate this. Probably should have recentered now. Okay, so we've got a light here. Now at this point, if I go to render, you'll see that, okay, now I have a light, but the problem is what we see in this scene and what we see here are different. If I go to move around the light, I'm going to get an update. So what we need to do is we enable change the way that Blender is actually showing us its previews. And the way we do this is we go down to multi-texture, and this is in the display section. Also, if you want, turn off the grid lines, so we don't see that because we don't necessarily need it. Go down to shading and GLSL. And at this point, you're not going to see any update because you need to change from solid view, which is what we've usually been working in. We've been working that in wireframe, to texture. And the instant we do that, all of a sudden now we get a real-time update of what's actually happening with that light and how it's behaving. So you just got to hit a couple buttons to get it set up. And then what we're trying to do is we're trying to create what's called Rembrandt lighting, which means that the light is 1/3, it's a quarter, it's 45 degrees off to the side, and then 45 degrees up from the ground. And what we get is we get this division in thirds. So we get a specular highlight here, and then we get let me see if I can. We get a specular highlight here, and then we get the other part. Now, if I go to render this, it's a little dark, and if we go and look at the lighting property, we can go down, we'll see that the default fall off is set to inverse square. This is basically a real life phenomena that light gets when it goes through the atmosphere. Loses its intensity. So we want to change this to constant, which turns that off, and all of a sudden you can see everything is much brighter. And now if I go to render this, you can see how much brighter, and actually I'm getting burnout where the specular highlight is. So that's something that I would probably want to actually dial back the light just a bit because the fall off's off. So let's do this at 0.8. And let's do a rendering and see, because you don't want to burn out anything, because what happens is you flatten it. So now there's a highlight there, but it's not as big, and we'll kind of know it's there and available. Okay, so next thing we need to do is let's rename this. So right click on outline and say rename, and I'll call this key light, and hit enter. And now I can either copy this or make a new light. I'm just going to copy it, so Shift D. And I'm going to grab the new light, and it's basically the invert you can see in the front. So it's down 45 degrees and out 45 degrees. And you can see at this point we're getting this weird optical phenomenon that's taking place. So a couple things we need to do is we need to turn the shadow off. It is off. We basically need to turn the specular highlight off of the bottom one to get rid of the shiny point. We want to decrease the energy, and let's try something like 0.3 and see what that happens. Looks like we could probably even go lower than that, but we're going to change the color using the eyedropper to the green, and now it's actually a little too dark, so this is why the hue saturation value is nice, because you can kind of dial it up and down and decrease the saturation. And what we're trying to do is simulate a little bit of color bleed, so the light hits and it comes back down and hits the bottom. And like I said, we also want to turn the diffuse off because there's no highlight from this key light. So let's render the image and look at it now. And now we have this lighting. We have a couple of points here and there that we can work to tweak a little. And the big thing that's missing is the shadow. So let's select the key light and go down, and right now it has no shadow, and we'll set it to ray trace shadow. Now the thing to be aware of is if you have a point light, you don't get to see the real-time shadows. If you turn your light to a sunlight, you get to see real-time shadows, or a spotlight. But if it's a point light, you're not going to see real-time shadows. So this is one drawback, that you basically have to render to kind of see what the shadow is. But now you can see our setup where we got the two lights and we got the shadow. Now this is all in darkness, so we need to fix this as well. So the final light we're going to add is basically, I'm going to grab this and I'm going to put this over top and pretty much dead center over the sphere and the golf ball, and maybe a little forward. And I'm going to change this to blue, and let's see if we can get it, and once again we can play around to saturation, those types of things. And what this is this fills up the top area, and this is called a fill light, or some people call it a rim light. And now we basically will have the blue up here, but you also see that blue light is also softening out the shadow. So that's a basic setup for doing what's called three-point lighting. The only final thing I would do is make sure that I go and I select all these lights and rename this to bounce light, hit enter, and then select the key light, the second one, and rename and call this fill light. And for the fill light and the key light, I want to make sure, okay, so the key light's got shadow. Fill light is just diffuse, no shadow, and the bounce light is just diffuse, no shadow. And that completes this first demo.